I stood in the middle of the courtroom, heart pounding beneath my cheap, slightly oversized suit. The fabric itched at my neck, but that wasn't why I was uncomfortable. It was the way everyone looked at me. The gallery was filled with soft chuckles. The opposing attorney, a well-seasoned man in his 50s, leaned over and whispered something to the judge, who tried and failed to suppress a smirk. A few jurors exchanged glances like this was all some bizarre prank. To them I was a joke. Just a teenager, maybe 16 tops, standing at the plaintiff's table in a high-stakes civil trial. Alone. No legal team. No parents in sight. Just me, my notes, and an unshakable resolve. "Mr. Davis," the judge finally said, adjusting his glasses, "I must ask again, are you sure you wish to represent yourself in this matter?" I nodded. "I'm not just representing myself," I said calmly. "I'm filing this lawsuit and I intend to win." More laughter. Even the court reporter shook her head with an amused smile. The judge sighed, amused but clearly trying to be patient. "And you believe you have the legal standing and knowledge required to proceed?" "I do," I replied, lifting a thick binder from my bag and placing it on the desk with a satisfying thud. "Would Your Honor like me to cite the precedent, or shall we proceed with opening statements?" The room fell quiet. Just for a moment. The judge leaned back slightly, studying me more closely now. "All right then," he said, glancing at opposing counsel. "Let's proceed." That's when everything began to change. The opposing attorney, Mr. Kessler, rose slowly with the confident gait of someone who had won more cases than I'd even had birthdays. He adjusted his silk tie and walked to the jury box, already oozing charisma. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began with a grin, "we all enjoy a good story. But today what we have is not a courtroom drama. It's a misunderstanding. A young man with perhaps an overactive imagination." There were faint chuckles again. I didn't react. He gestured to me, careful not to sound cruel but making the message clear. "My client, a respected property developer, is being accused of unlawful seizure of assets based on, well, we'll see what exactly. I urge you to keep your minds open and to consider the facts, not the fantasy." He nodded toward the judge, then returned to his seat. The judge looked to me. "Your turn, Mr. Davis." I stood up slowly, walked toward the jury, not with the theatrical flair of a trained lawyer, but with the deliberate confidence of someone who knew he didn't need theatrics. "Good morning," I began. "I know what you're thinking. What's a kid doing here? Why is he representing himself? Why didn't someone stop him?" I paused, meeting their eyes. Well, someone did try to stop me. Several people, actually. But no one would listen. So I studied. I read. I learned. Not just because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because what happened to my family was wrong. And no one else was willing to fight it. A shift in the room. No more laughter. I lifted the binder again and opened it. "Today I will show you signed documents. Backdated permits. Audio from a public meeting. All proving that Mr. Kessler's client forced my mother out of her home under false pretenses." Gasp. The jury leaned in. "Not because we couldn't pay," I continued, "but because we didn't have the power to fight back." Now even the judge sat up straighter. "This isn't about drama," I said, voice firm. "It's about truth. And if you give me the chance, I'll prove every word." I walked back to my table. Silence. And then, incredibly, a single juror nodded. The first piece of evidence I submitted was a copy of a notice, the so-called eviction warning, supposedly sent to my mother 3 months before the demolition. The developer had claimed we were squatters. That we had no legal lease. I asked the clerk to zoom in on the document displayed on the screen for the jury. "Notice the date," I said, pointing. "April 14th. Then I clicked to the next slide, a certified postal receipt dated April 20th. "Now look at this. Proof the letter wasn't even mailed until 6 days after the stated deadline to respond had already passed." Mr. Kessler stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is not a certified document examiner." "I'm not a witness," I responded without skipping a beat. "I'm the plaintiff, and the evidence speaks for itself." The judge raised a brow, then gestured for me to continue. What followed over the next hour was a meticulous unraveling. I showed screenshots of city zoning records, mysteriously altered the day before the demolition order was approved. I played a 3-minute audio clip from a town council meeting, where the developer's project manager slipped up, admitting on record, "We cleared out the lot, it was just one family and they didn't push back." The jury's expressions hardened. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. I watched Mr. Kessler scribbling furiously, his earlier smugness quickly evaporating. Then I brought out the final piece, A hand-signed lease, notarized and dated 2 years before the supposed illegal occupancy began. It had my mother's name, her signature, the developer's company seal. The courtroom was dead quiet. The judge adjusted his robe. "Where did you get this lease, Mr. Davis?" "It was in a locked file cabinet in our garage," I answered. "My mom kept it after they served her the fake notice. She said she had a feeling they'd try something." Mr. Kessler was pale now. His co-counsel leaned over, whispering something urgently in his ear. The judge looked from me to the defense, then back. "Court will recess for lunch. Mr. Kessler, I suggest you take this time to consider your next move very carefully." As the gavel came down, I finally exhaled. They weren't laughing anymore. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with low voices and anxious pacing. I sat alone on a bench, flipping through my binder, though I'd already memorized every page. That's when Mr. Kessler approached. He wasn't smug anymore. No polished grin. Just tight lips and tired eyes. He sat beside me, not too close, and cleared his throat. "You've done your homework," he said quietly. I didn't answer. "I've seen attorneys 3 times your age fall apart under pressure like that." "You kept your composure." Still I said nothing. Finally he leaned in slightly. "Look, my client is willing to settle." Quietly. "We'll offer your mother a cash payout. Enough to relocate, start fresh. A few $100,000. I turned my head toward him. "That won't undo what he did." "No," Kessler admitted, "but it's better than risking a full trial. You're good, kid. I'll give you that. But juries can be unpredictable." I let the words hang. Then I replied, "We're not interested in silence money." He blinked. "Excuse me? We don't want a private settlement. We want accountability, an apology, and public restitution for everyone else who got pushed out of that neighborhood." He sat back like I'd hit him in the chest. "That's a lot to ask," he muttered. I met his eyes, steady. "It's the least you owe us." Before he could respond, the bailiff appeared. "Court reconvenes in 5 minutes." Mr. Kessler stood slowly. "If you change your mind." "I won't," I said flatly. He walked away and I stood, adjusting my collar. Back in the courtroom, the jury returned to their seats. The judge called for order. And as I approached the plaintiff's table again, there was no more laughter, no more smirks. Only silence. And eyes waiting to hear what I'd say next. As the trial resumed, the judge looked between both parties, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Kessler," he said, "will the defense be presenting its case?" Kessler stood, noticeably slower than before. He buttoned his jacket but didn't make eye contact with me. "Yes, Your Honor, but we'd like to request a brief sidebar." The judge nodded. The 2 attorneys approached the bench. I remained seated, but I could see the unease on Kessler's face from where I was. After a few quiet minutes of murmuring, the judge leaned back in his chair and spoke clearly for the courtroom to hear. "The court has been informed that the defense intends to enter settlement discussions with the plaintiff." Murmurs rippled across the room. The judge held up a hand. "However, the plaintiff has made it clear, on record, that a private agreement is not acceptable. This case will proceed unless new terms are agreed upon and presented formally." He looked straight at me. "Mr. Davis, is that correct?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm not here for money. I'm here for justice. For my mom. For the others who were displaced. I want the truth on the record." The judge nodded slowly. "Very well." Kessler returned to his seat, now visibly rattled. "Defense calls no further witnesses," he said abruptly. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're waiving your defense?" Kessler hesitated. Then nodded. "We are, Your Honor." Gasps echoed. Even the court reporter glanced up, eyes wide. The judge turned back to the jury. "In that case, we will move directly to closing arguments." I stood again, heart steady. I knew the law. I knew the truth. And I was ready to deliver the final blow. I approached the jury for the last time, binder in hand, though at this point I didn't need it. "Thank you," I began, "for listening. For seeing past what I look like and instead hearing what I had to say." I paused, letting the silence land. "You were shown the documents. You heard the audio. You saw proof that my mother, and others, were forced out of their homes not because of legal reasons, but because someone wanted profit more than people. I could see their faces, tight jaws, arms crossed, a few nods. And when we asked for help," I continued, "we were ignored, told it was too late, that the papers were final, that nothing could be done. But I'm standing here to tell you, something can always be done." I turned slightly toward the defense table. When powerful people assume no one will fight back, they start cutting corners. They forget to cover their tracks. They think no one will notice. I looked back to the jury. But I noticed, and so did you. The courtroom was frozen. Not even a cough. I returned to my seat. The judge gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mr. Davis." Then he turned to the jury. "You've heard all testimony and arguments. It is now your duty to deliberate." The jury filed out. And I sat, waiting, watching the man who'd stolen our home avoid my gaze for the first time. 32 minutes. That's how long the jury was gone. Not long enough for anyone to relax, but just long enough for tension to crawl up everyone's spine. I sat completely still. I didn't fidget, didn't check my phone. I just stared forward, listening to the quiet ticking of the courtroom clock. Then the door opened. The bailiff announced, "The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone stood as the jurors filed back in. The forewoman, a woman in her 60s with tired but kind eyes, held the paper like it weighed 50 pounds. The judge looked at her. "Has the jury reached a unanimous decision?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." She cleared her throat, voice steady. "In the matter of Davis versus Halden Development Corporation, we find in favor of the plaintiff, on all counts." A sharp inhale echoed behind me. Then silence again. The judge nodded. "Damages?" "Compensatory damages in the amount of $850,000. Punitive damages in the amount of $2 million. Someone gasped. A pen dropped. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a beat. The judge banged his gavel once. "The verdict is accepted and entered into the record. Court is adjourned." I didn't smile. Not yet. Not until I turned and saw my mom standing at the back of the courtroom, tears in her eyes, hand covering her mouth, her body trembling. She hadn't told me she was coming. I walked to her and we embraced tightly. No words were needed. Mr. Kessler stood frozen. His client looked like someone had poured ice water down his back. I didn't gloat. Didn't say a word to them. Because I didn't need to. The truth had done all the talking for me. The case made headlines the next day. Teen legal prodigy wins landmark trial against property giant. High schooler exposes corruption, forces $2.85 million judgment in court. It was surreal watching news anchors talk about me like I was some kind of myth. But I wasn't special. I wasn't gifted. I was just prepared. I went back to school the next week, still had a chemistry final coming up after all. A few classmates stared like they'd never really noticed me before. One teacher asked me to give a talk during civics. I politely declined. My mom used part of the money to start a foundation, Home First, offering legal resources to tenants wrongfully evicted or pressured by big developers. She hired real attorneys, some of whom had reached out to me directly, asking if they could volunteer. That was new. As for me, I kept studying. Law had started as survival, a desperate search for justice. But now it was a purpose, a path. Not long after, I got an invitation, full scholarship to a prestigious legal prep academy in D.C., followed by a guaranteed seat in their university law program. I didn't even apply, they had found me. One night, just before I left for the academy, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table. "You know," she said, brushing my hair back like I was still a kid, "when they laughed at you in that courtroom, I almost couldn't breathe." I looked at her. "But you showed up anyway." She smiled. "Of course I did. I knew something they didn't." "What's that?" "That you don't need a law degree to be powerful." She paused, then added, "You just need to know the truth and never back down." Years passed. The case that started as a desperate fight for one home became a blueprint for protecting thousands. Davis versus Halden was cited in housing courts across the country. Law schools taught it as a case study in youth advocacy and tenant rights. Judges referred to it as the trial that turned the system on its head. I kept my head down mostly. Earned my law degree early. Passed the bar before I could legally rent a car. Declined offers from the very firms that once dismissed people like my mother. Instead, I returned home and joined Home First, this time not as a client's son, but as lead counsel. We didn't just fight cases. We changed policy. New tenant protections. Transparent permitting laws. Mandatory community oversight in redevelopment zones. Real change, not on paper but in people's lives. And it all traced back to one courtroom. One laugh. One decision not to walk away. Sometimes I'd get letters, from kids who felt overlooked. From single parents forced to choose between rent and groceries. From lawyers who said I reminded them why they started. And every once in a while I'd go back to that courthouse. Not to relive it, but to remember. Remember that justice doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears borrowed shoes and carries a binder. Months after the trial, life settled into a new rhythm, but nothing was quite the same anymore. The laughter in the courtroom had turned to silence, then respect. The whispered doubts had become hushed admiration. And the kid everyone wrote off as just a teenager had sparked something much bigger than a single legal victory. The money from the settlement wasn't just a windfall, it was a lifeline. My mom used it to rebuild her life, but she also made good on a promise: to fight for those who had no voice. Home First grew rapidly, helping hundreds reclaim their rights, providing free legal aid, education, and hope. I found myself drawn deeper into the law. What started as self-taught survival grew into a passion. I enrolled in every legal course I could find, devoured case law and statutes late into the night, and began volunteering with tenant advocacy groups. The scholarship to the academy in D.C. was a turning point. It was a new world of opportunity, but also a reminder. No matter how far I went, the fight wasn't over. Each lecture, each case study felt personal, as if the lessons I was learning could help thousands more like my mom. One evening, sitting in a small coffee shop between classes, an older man approached me. He introduced himself as Judge Hendricks, the very judge who had presided over my trial. I have to say, he smiled, you changed the way I see the law. Not just what it says but what it means to people. I thanked him quietly. It meant more than he knew. That's when he added, don't ever forget the law is a tool. How it's wielded, that's what makes the difference. I nodded knowing he was right. Because in the end it wasn't just about winning a case. It was about fighting for justice. For dignity. For fairness in a world that so often overlooks the powerless. Years later, standing at the podium as a guest speaker at a law conference, I looked out at a room full of eager faces. I told them my story. Not as some miraculous prodigy, but as a kid who refused to be ignored. Justice isn't reserved for the elite, I said. It belongs to everyone. And sometimes, it starts with one person standing up, even when everyone else laughs. Afterwards, a young woman came forward. Thank you, she said, tears in her eyes. You gave me hope to fight my own battle. That's when I realized, my journey wasn't just mine anymore. It was a movement. From courtroom laughter to courtroom triumph, from silence to a roar for change, it was proof that even the smallest voice could shake the pillars of power. And all it takes is courage.